going to have four panelists and the honor to have Mehdi moderating the session and the discussion. The discussion is going to be about the digital coordination through APIs, to talk about legal and technical integration, and the idea is to explore current API-related digital coordination models, legal infrastructures, and approaches to comply with the current data sharing framework. We will really like to exchange views about what are the enablers and the barriers to coordinating the digital interactions from a systemic perspective. So if you want, Mehdi, you can introduce the speakers, or I can do it. Just let me know.
Well, the goal, yeah. Let's invite all the speakers on stage,
Perfect.
You included. You know, like we are a few researchers talking about that, yeah. So what I propose is that we all, for the people joining us right now, it's so we can make a quick turnaround about who we are and what we do in this about API Term of Services directly. So maybe for the new one we didn't see yet, maybe we can begin by David.
Oh, hello, good morning. I'm David O'Neill. I'm the CEO of Apimetrics. We're an API monitoring company that looks into how you measure some of the things that Mehdi was just talking about, in fact. And the reason I'm saying good morning to you in Paris is unfortunately can't be there, and I'm virtually here from Seattle.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Jonas, maybe you can tell a little bit thing.
Hi, my name is Jonas Onland, program leader on digital in Europe for the Associations of Dutch Municipalities, the VNG, and we have a big strategy on APIs to secure not only indeed the technical interoperability, but also the legal requirements and all the legislation that is coming up and how to integrate that. So we're very happy to join and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Jonas. Kasia?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kasia. I am a legal expert working in Joint Research Center. It's a European Commission in-house science service, and I work in the intersection of technical, legal, and economic area. I'm a lawyer by training, and yes, I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, and Daniel right now.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Daniel Sarasa. I am a director of the Zaragoza City of Knowledge Foundation, which is a sort of digital agency for the city to promote knowledge society. I've been involved since long ago in the construction of several APIs, fundamentally to a platform that is called the Citizen Card, but now also developing more human APIs so we can engage citizens in the construction of a smart city. Recently published some of these ideas into a book, which is called Open City, Digital Cities, now recently published.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel. And actually, I'll start by you because it's API Days. We used to have public sector speakers, mostly private sector speaker and everything. With Smart City, you seem to be in between. So, do you see any difference, like a mindset difference or legal framework differences, really between the two in terms when it comes to APIs and software and digital infrastructure?
Well, of course, we have there's some difference. Beginning with the fact that we are supposed to be a public body, so we are legally responsible for what happens in the city. So we have more responsibility than anyone when we published an API. In fact, when we publish an API, we sign a contract with the users, and everything that is published, for example, we're talking about an API connecting our open data to the community. We're absolutely responsible for the accuracy, uniqueness, and quality of those data, okay? So yeah, there are differences, but there are also some limitations, for example. Unfortunately, there are lots of data that is produced in the city because most of us people in the earth live in cities, as we all know, but unfortunately, not all the data that can create wealth and knowledge is managed by the city halls. There are many entities that are already producing or collecting data in the city. So this is a huge challenge, and I think that it's very interesting that we could discuss this further, because we're talking about things like data sharing, data governance beyond the city hall boundaries, etc., etc.
Thank you very much. And also, Kasia, with the 4,000 term of services you've seen with Monica in the first presentation, actually, did you see also a split like that, or did you see any like big trends coming between about who produced the term of services?
Well, actually, yeah, we did this analysis of the terms of services, and it was very interesting and a rewarding exercise. But I think we're not there yet in terms of understanding who produced exactly the terms of service. We see that the terms of service, they depend how they provided. They will depend on the size of the company. They also depend on the geographic location of the company. But our focus was to see if the laws, European laws, are respected when the service is provided to the European market. And we were very happy to see that, that GDPR, for example, appears a lot in the terms of service. It gives us an indication that we probably will need to dig deeper into the context. But it indicates that even small companies or big companies, they are aware of the legal constraints and the high benchmark for the privacy set out in Europe. And in a way, at least at the terms of service level, on the design of terms of service, they are respected. Like, we don't talk here maybe about the enforcement and ability to enforce those terms of service through the courts, but at least when the mutual relation is set out, we see awareness of both sides, about the constraints.
Yeah, thank you, Kasia, and we invite all the people who didn't see the 4,000 term of services study that has been released earlier. Maybe Jonas, like, taking a higher level, like, what's your overview about like the API term of services challenges for digital infrastructure and collaboration?
I think it's language, so understanding and standardization, and I think one of the challenges is also competition, because what you see, where in the past a lot of parties were providing solutions to municipalities, it moved towards platforms, and now the discussion is going through who delivers the next generation standards. But from my perspective, I think what cities really need, but also businesses really need, is a mutual language on these different standards to free the data from the silos. So the API strategy is crucial to secure all these different how do you say it, the collaboration between public and private. It is good, but it is a challenge how to bring these standardization fora together, and not to see it as a competition, basically. So the research that is done is, I think, very crucial, and also the proactive role that the European Commission is taking in building this strategy, so that like cities and the interoperability between cities can flourish, but also the industry. And talking a lot to the industry as well, I think most of them are focused on what will be these new standards, because that will decrease cost in production processes and these type of things. So we all benefit from a mutual language. It's easy to say, but difficult to reach, I think. And it's a cultural part. So not really analyzing all the technical parts is important, but getting to know each other and really going for that, I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, and I also ask you another question, Jonas, before going to speak to David. Yeah. But there, sometimes in the open source or open data movement, we say public money, public code, or public money, public data. Would you say public money, public APIs at some point?
Well, the risk of I like that discussion on open source and versus open standard. So from an open source collaboration, I really believe in open source, but from an API perspective, also from a cybersecurity perspective, it's very important to discuss the open standards. So these microservices need to connect with each other to secure interoperability. But it's a bit of a risk to define everything. We need to distinguish basically open source collaboration and open standard integration, and you need open source collaboration to secure that these standards work, but we also want them to be secure and safe. So and moving towards public, it's a risk. If you look at what we want to accomplish with our e-government strategy as Europe, where we really move to human centricity, like Daniel said on the citizen card, for example. Citizens only once a year, probably, hopefully, make use of services from the government. But most of the time they use payment services, they buy food. So these transactions are mainly in the private sector as well. So I think you need standards that are public-private, but they need to be governed. So the Data Governance Act, for example, is really important to secure that public-private data sharing.
Yeah, and David, so thank you very much, Jonas. And Jonas said, really the fact interoperability is key. It's different because now we have runtime, we have capabilities. It's not just like data or assets. Like it's really runtime coming. Apimetrics is the main platform for public API monitoring. And so, yeah, what's your point of view on like this relationship between like performance and agreements?
The short answer is we don't really have a clear vision on that yet across the industry. That the agreements are often put into the terms and conditions, but they're not necessarily actively tracked or monitored, or even monitored in the way that we agree to. And that's something I think as the industry matures, and picking up on some of Jonas's points about how we do this between public and private data, we're going to need some better standards and some better ways of enforcement between the terms and conditions and between the standards setting agencies. And I personally believe it's absolutely essential for both competition and for consumer rights that we have open standards for exchange of data in a secure and meaningful way. And that means moving away from some of the historical technologies like screen scraping and others towards secure APIs that are absolutely locked in. But it also means we have to have some ways of agreeing that interchange is done on a level playing field. We've seen this recently in Australia, where they're still struggling to agree on what shape certain data fields are. Even though the standards are mandated from the government, they can't agree on how many digits the year uses, and some people reverse the year formats, which means the people doing the integration have work to do, which is good for large companies with large teams of engineering, but less good for new entrants and companies coming along. And my vision, and one of the reasons I'm passionate about the need for standards on data and quality and means of enforcing them, is to move away from this world where large players who have a legal team and the ability to sign big bilateral relationships with the major data providers and trying in some respects to protect that, because they've got a often 8-figure, possibly high 8-figure investment from their investors in doing that, are scared that somebody with maybe a few $1 million in seed capital can come along and build a new solution that takes them out. But I think it's imperative for the consumer and for consumer rights around the world that we have that kind of competition, so people don't get locked into another cycle of large players essentially supplying each other and making sure that there is I hate to use the word cartel, but even if it's unofficial, you do find that things like fees tend to move towards the same levels. And I don't want to see that happening with open standards with APIs. And I think by opening things up and by making things easier to measure and having standards on how we do that, that's the way we get around that.
Yeah, one quick question that comes up with your knowledge about these big deals with where performance is key. It seems the API term of services, like public term of services, are the way to sign, like, let's say, in a self-service manner, to sign up in a self-service manner. But when it reaches big numbers, there is always an ad hoc contract coming. Do you see that, David?
Yes, we do. We also see that people do work for the things that they know are important to them. It's human nature. If you have a company that's worth millions of dollars a year in terms of business or the value of the partnership, they will get more love than somebody who's worth a few tens of thousands or even less, a free one. But I think we're seeing it less in, well, we see it less in the UK because the UK have centralized everything. So if you meet central requirements for connecting to APIs, then you can get a license to connect to all the banks. So that's one extreme that the UK have gone down. The European Commission, it's a little bit more of a patchwork, that the PSD2 regulations for financial APIs leave it largely up to the national regulators to do. So you have different national regulators with different views. The US is still bilateral relationships. So if you want to provide a way of integrating to lots of financial services providers, you have to have a way of agreeing with each of the financial service providers. And if you're a small company coming along for the first time and trying to get picking randomly Bank of America to take your phone call, they will not get the love of a Plaid or a Tink or someone enormous. So that is something that is a real problem, and that's where I see something. That's where I see organizations like the European Commission being able to bring value to consumers by making that playing field much more level. The Australians are doing this through their ACCC regulations. Brazil Central Bank, the same in Brazil. I see this as absolutely essential to it. The other piece that we do see is if people, one of the challenges that we have with measuring this is people tend to measure with the things that tell them the good news and ignore all the things that tell them bad news. We've actually been seeing a situation with a messaging company for the last 48 hours where everything works from AWS but doesn't from any other cloud vendor. So I'm assuming the reason why they haven't noticed themselves is all of their monitoring infrastructure is AWS built, talking to AWS stacks. If you aren't actually looking for problems, you probably won't find them. And we need to remember in open standards and open APIs, we actually need to have requirements on the providers to go looking for problems, or at least mandate that they have to go looking for problems, rather than just taking it as read that everything is good.
Thank you. And Daniel, going back, building APIs for cities with citizens, there may be other challenges coming. Like, do you make any difference when you make something for public good or something for working for an ecosystem of hybrid, like citizens and companies? Like, can you tell us what's the process behind that? Like, what's beyond just the document?
Yeah. Okay. So when we started all these, I must say that we were a bunch of people coming from the open source world, open source software. So we started thinking a lot about how to expand the open source notion in Linux to other fields. And the first one obviously was data. So it was the beginning of the open data movement. And we little by little we started to build this API on data, where we have complicated things, adding a lot of new standards, JSON, 5 stars according to Tim Berners-Lee quality standard, etc., etc. But basically, we understood that what gave us this API on data was a high reach. We were able to reach a lot of people, fundamentally from the tech world, but with a rather low quality of interactions. And we as a city are very interested in increasing the quality of interactions with the ecosystem, because the ecosystem, as you may know by the Metcalfe's law, is worth proportionally to the number and quality of the interactions that you make between each node. So, but this had an advantage. On the contrary, it needed a low mediation effort. I mean, you publish the API, you put your efforts in keeping that updated with good quality, and people download the data, and hopefully they build their own applications. Now, we wanted to move forward and increase the quality of these interactions. And that's why we moved from data API to a platform API. So we built an API where you could interact with the software of the city, which was the citizen card. Now we built this public API.citizencard.es, which I think it's simple but quite powerful, and it requires a medium of mediation. Okay, because you have to publish this interface, you had to mount communication campaigns so people know about the capabilities of this API, and on the contrary, you low the reach. You're reaching less people because you're only reaching the companies that are effectively interested in developing services for the citizen card. Okay, and then we evolved through a next level of APIs, which were we thought, okay, we're reaching the developers, we're reaching the techie world, we're reaching some companies, but we're not reaching people, non-technological people. So we don't do this because there is a barrier, a technological barrier between normal citizens that want to produce things for the city, because we mustn't forget that we need everyone to build a smart city. So we built this human API, so moving the concept of open software to data, but also to buildings and projects. So I have a project that I want to see built in my city. How can I do it? So you need a bunch of mediators that speak with non-technological people, speak in their own language, that do co-creation techniques, etc., etc. And at some point, that you have to have your APIs, your data, and your software APIs ready to close the circle and to be able to effectively build services that respond to citizen needs.
Yeah, total makes sense of the story, and the fact you come from the open source, open data. Sometimes we see as different implications on how you open APIs, allow a reuse of the work, or for example. So I may have a question right now for you all, and you can jump in if you want. But the thing is, for you, what's the most critical clause? About term of services, like it can be interoperability, revocation, breaking change. For you, what's really at stake here? What's really the most important thing that a provider should really show to people, if there is one, at least yours? What it would be?
I will start. I have finished the last one, so I will start this round. I think I'm really keen on the Creative Commons license. Okay, because we have the following paradox. We're not able, as a general rule. Okay, some cities are able to do that, but we don't have the negotiating power to access to freely access data from the new platform providers. I'm talking about Uber, I'm talking about Deliveroo, I'm talking about Facebook, whatever, okay? And these contain very important data about the city. We could operate the city, we could run the city, we could create public good in a much better way if we could have access to this. But medium-sized cities, we don't have that kind of power. But on the contrary, they can use freely our open data platforms, and they can improve the route delivery algorithms, etc., etc. So it would be really great that we put this Creative Commons clause in the open data APIs, where they are free to use them, but if they choose to use them, they should translate the same conditions to their end customers.
So share alike. For you, the most important is that if you use it, you share alike with the same license. Like in open data, sometimes, like some license, ODBL or whatever, GNU, the GNU license, general user license or whatever, GPL, V3.
That's it.
Okay, yeah, totally understand. Someone wants to, Kasia, maybe?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Mehdi. For us, as a public sector, and JRC takes part in the lawmaking at the European level. For us, the important part for TOS is that those terms of service between the parties serve the objectives set out in the data strategy. And the main issue is that to build ecosystem, we need to build trust. So maybe it's not a specific, contractual clause or contractual condition, but an overall overview of how the terms of service are created. And those specific conditions are balanced for both parties and, written in a way to build trust between the parties. So liability, some warranty on the service, no total exclusion, for example, of liability. So those issues are important, to build on the top of this. And then when the proper balance between the parties is established, public sector can use APIs to also to consider it as a mature tool facilitating introduction and facilitating implementation of other policies. Like we have data portability in GDPR, we have still problem with delivering on maybe that data subject right. Data sovereignty, for example, in the Digital Governance Act, control and monitoring, API can facilitate compliance monitoring under, for example, under Data Market Acts. Yeah, it can also alleviate the burden, regulatory burden of compliance. So there are options, and we can see that APIs fit to it. But as a regulator, I'm this lawyer that operates at a quite abstract level, and that's true that sometimes it's hard to understand the technical aspects that can facilitate the objectives we have as a public sector. So we need that sort of dialogue to create the constant feedback loop from the sector and from the private sector and public sector that comes with quite an abstract objective goal to set up a balance between different interests of stakeholders and between to introduce balance of fundamental rights, how you make fundamental rights to APIs, but there is a link, and it would be interesting to dig better, deeper.
Yeah, so I hear liability, I hear compliance, so I hear a really important clause there. Maybe Jonas, you first say the interoperability, but do you see any really important stuff that should be like easy to understand or clear or enforceable?
Yeah. Well, I think to elaborate a little bit on what Kasia and Daniel said earlier, I think what's really important is to start with the principles of how we want to live together. So trust, transparency, explainability of these new technologies. That's something. Well, there are a lot of developments in there, and I think everybody has the same feeling about that. And the challenge is how to translate that into the legislation. So the legislative framework, which is proposed in the digital decade, I really like it, but it's a lot. So it's so much that it's hard to cope. How to implement it? You see that with the GDPR, and alone this year on AI, Digital Services Act, Market Act, APIToS 2.0, and so on. There are a lot of things coming up. So the big challenge is how to translate these legal frameworks into your technology, so that if you use a component based on open standards like APIs, that you are secure that the trust is there, that you can use it as a public sector, but also as a private sector, that you're compliant with what is happening. But there's one thing, if you ask me, what we really need to change, and that's also the big tech companies that we see in the US. Data is the new gold, as everybody's saying. So we really need to think how to reverse engineer the value model of how we use technologies. So the ownership of data and the consent that people give, not only on the actual data, but also the metadata, because that's where the value is. I think that should be reversed. And we could do that in all these technologies that use APIs, where people have ownership and control over their data and share it, but also create a benefit for them. So what's the benefit by providing your data to others? I think that's a very interesting topic to start investigating and to really integrate it, because then all citizens have an incentive, So, like I said earlier, it's a cultural change. So, what's in it for me? Why would I use this? Well, if there's an incentive to start sharing data, then and it creates a better life for me, well, why not? So, I think that's one of the main, crucial parts that we could do. The rest you can organize in the system, but that incentive, it's a soft one, but I think that could be very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And you, David, what's your point on this?
I think Kasia actually made some very good points there on trust is essential. Trust is to keep it, but the key thing about trust is to agree on how you measure anything. And one of the challenges with terms, conditions, and compliance standards and the regulations is I'm going to make a sweeping generalization here. It's very easy to set standards and regulations, but then it's very hard to actually prove if people are compliant to them. And what we need to have are some common frameworks for trust in terms of how we measure, how we agree that we've measured the same way, how that transparency is enabled across the ecosystem. Otherwise, it can devolve into the companies with the loudest voices and the most number of engineers they compile into a conference room will always win a debate with somebody with fewer resources. And that's the opposite of what I think we're trying to achieve with this. So absolutely, API compliance and how we measure the API compliance is key to success. And having ways that we all agree, this is how we measure it, these are the things we expect to see, and these are the things we expect to see from proof. Especially in tech, where going back to Jonas's point of the big West Coast US tech companies, if you have not sat in a meeting with a DevOps engineer from one of the large tech companies who disagrees with your findings about what their platform is doing, you haven't lived. Because you need to bring sandwiches and a flask of coffee and refreshments for everybody, because you're going to be there a long time, because they will argue the decimal places on timing measurements. They will argue, was it a Tuesday? You can't do that on Tuesday. Everything will be pushed in front of you as a barrier to proving that they had a problem. Even if they finally accept it, you will have wasted a lot of time. And for the success of all of these endeavors that we're trying to do, having some standards that don't reward, in my opinion, bad behavior or natural human behavior, but give us a standardized way without any fear or favor is what we need to be in the terms and conditions, and actually spelled out of, if someone is saying they're ISO 27000 compliant, this is how they prove it. If they say they meet the Data Market Act requirements, this is how they will prove it. Having something like that, and having ways, in the same way that we certify companies under ISO standards, having ways we can certify that tech standards meet that is what I think we need to do.
Yeah, and it reminds me this famous saying in the API space, like when you consume an API, you consume the words that comes with it. Maybe an API built by Daniel or Jonas will be completely different in terms of what you can do, reuse, or by someone else. So it's the people behind it, the company behind it, and sometimes there are direct business models at some point when it's a company, or how they think behind the scene.
Well, so, just to add to that, the thing you have to remember is a lot of these companies are in competition with each other. So what the European Commission and other bodies are trying to achieve is directly against the business ethos of a lot of these companies. As Jonas and Daniel point out, there's a lot of value to them having this data out there, but they don't necessarily want to do it because Uber providing you with drive patterns potentially helps out other companies like Lyft or other rideshare companies or historical taxi companies in the same areas. We are dealing with natural resistance inside these organizations that we have to overcome, because it's better for everybody if we have these open standards and a level playing field.
Yeah, that's actually my next question about, like, how do we solve this on the long term? What do we do? And we have really different levels to do that. We can do nothing and let the market allocate the right resources and the right thing that will happen. The invisible hand. We can try to do a label, like Google Enterprise API. So someone directly, the company themselves, engaging to a label or a third-party label. That could be an example. We can have a framework like Creative Commons, or a framework that explains things, at least for people to make it easy. If we go above, we can have a rating agency, and just to say, David O'Neill is actually building an API rating agency. So this is why we're one of the reasons we invited you. So like a third party, trusted third party that really make the intermediation between each other. Should it be a corporate standard, like some companies organizing into agreeing to a common framework, or should it be the law? Like it could be also an official standard like IEEE, IETF, or whatever, like standard recognized W3C by the community, or just a law obliging to do it. And we've seen that with PSD2, it took some time, but at the end, something came out, right? Something came out. So what's the right level to your mind? Who wants to start?
I'm happy to go again. Oh, sorry.
All right. No, go ahead, David.
Okay, my gold standard, I used to work in the mobile technology sector many years ago. What was achieved with the GSM standard and how GSM allowed for interoperability between companies that didn't like each other led to an explosion of mobile technologies in the European Union and other countries that didn't happen until much later in the US. And everywhere you look, while there is where there are competitive markets, it is an act of faith that markets always make things better, but you can look at the wrong part of the market and draw the wrong conclusions. And I look at a lot of these things, particularly around financial services, around open data initiatives. It's like the use of mobile telephony. If you have a common standard for everybody to share information and people to be portable, companies will compete on the technology and the products they offer and not get caught up into building their own proprietary solutions. My concern about waiting for the market to win is the market will never win in this sort of thing. It will only ever come up with walled gardens. Walled ecosystems. They will try and keep people in. And I think we need to, the goal of what we do has to look like what we did with mobile telephony.
Yeah, Daniel, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say another thing, but let's build on David's idea, because I think it's really good. Because this is not a zero-sum game. We can create a new market. I will tell one example. For example, we've been trying for some time to build alongside EuroCities a citizen card which can be functioning in several different cities in Europe. So imagine that you're a citizen, and with the same card, you hop into a bus in London, and then you get a taxi in Zaragoza, in my city, for example. Okay, this idea is something that was done years ago with the Social Security card. Okay, you can get ill in every country, and then there is some APIs between social securities around there that cross-invoice each other. But you cannot do this at the city level. So we were able to find common standards to communicate with let's say, smart cities. Okay, this creates a whole new market, because what is the gain of having a market so fragmented? I think this diminishes the actual size of the market. Okay, because it's very difficult from a Finnish company to come to Zaragoza and offer a solution that can be operative in our city. Okay, that's beginning with the fact that they don't even know how to find the information of our API. Okay, so I think that is really, really interesting to create these new standards, maybe really minimum common denominator standards. Okay, not being too ambitious at the beginning, but we can by standardizing a small thing, I think, and by adding many cities together, I think that we can really enlarge the size of the smart city market. Which, frankly speaking, when you go to the Smart City Expo, the first thing that companies say is, "Who's buying? Where's the market here?" Okay, nobody exactly knows how the smart city markets works actually, and it's been a long time since we speak about smart cities.
Yeah, now they even call it cognitive cities sometimes.
Okay,
smart,
yeah.
Smart is so 2018, right? So 2019.
Of course.
Yeah.
Jonas, you have an idea about what's the right level?
Yeah, I think it's think global and act local. It's a bit of an open door, but Regarding your question, I think it's really, really important that as a government, you need to be proactive. So the vision by the European Commission of the entrepreneurial state, almost like taking a lead and setting a mission to 2030, I think that's a very, very big and good step that was taken. And this legislative framework is helping a lot. You see the impact of the GDPR and how much change they're doing, or the example of PSD2. So I think that is a very important instrument. At the same time, it's that bottom-up movement, like Daniel is describing. So again, getting that community going and making it practical, showcasing and creating that alternative. I think that's really really a big one. And why not? Why not create that alternative for the data sets that are provided now by the big US companies, the data spaces approach by the European Commission to get the data and then unleash it again through APIs. I think that's a very important data infrastructure to enable that acceleration and create a platform for new services, public-private, that are combined based on these European principles. So I think that's a good, and by starting to explain this story and using imagination, people who are not technical as well starting to understand, okay, this has a lot of added value for me. So I think also storytelling is an important part in this one.
Yeah, I remember in 2012, I was talking to a European national railway, one of them, I'll not name them directly, but they were having an open data strategy, but people were downloading the data and never talking to them, right? They didn't have any engagement. So I said, okay, why don't you build on top an API for people who wants to get connected, get analytics, and so you know who is using for what reason, and at least you manage an ecosystem. The data is still open through open data, but with an API, you have a technical contract that engage, the community that gives ubiquity and stuff like that. But at this time, I remind they told me that with open data, we can have license that oblige the user to reopen the data, but with API, we can't. And they were selling like, we don't want their data to be used by Google. We want an ecosystem, not just the big player, because they believe public domain sometimes benefits the strong and not the whole. Again, that's an opinion, but I agree with you. It's about storytelling. So look, at some point, but you have to give it to someone at some point if you want this ecosystem to happen. So that was a weird discussion because this railway company was considering Google as their main competitor. They say Google is selling train tickets, will sell train tickets soon. So and actually we pay already a lot to Google on search engines. So this is why they were afraid when they've seen Google Flight and stuff like that. So really hard discussion about like reuse and openness there. Kasia, to your mind, what would be the right level? Of course, you work at GRC, so I don't know what you're allowed to say.
I mean, well, from lawmaking perspective, there is a inherent problem with regulating technology, especially fast developing technology. API is maybe not new, but the way how it's used, it's new. This API as a channel, it's very hard to regulate it. And actually, I would suggest, and many researchers agree with me that binding laws, for example, is not the way to approach developing technology. When you have binding law, you can really risk stopping innovation. Lawmakers need to build space for technology to flourish, and when some risks or imbalances appear on the way, and after 20 years or 5 years, or after some time materialize, there is a way to intervene and to pass laws to reestablish this balance. So actually lawmaking and legal instruments now it's a toolbox. It's not only binding laws. In reality, there are many different types of regulations, many different ways of regulating. So binding legislation, well, it's not a way to go at this stage of maturity of technology and of understanding how it really can be used. So yes, I think that important is to set out the general principles and give floor and create space for private sector and for practitioners to develop tools to help basically regulator to achieve what he needs to achieve with the tools provided by others. Like it's a common work. It's a cooperation, and it has to be this way. And actually, I must say that it's not about getting somewhere at some point, passing the regulation and forget it. It's a constant feedback loop, and it's a constant work because things change, and in the complex changing system, there is a constant lawmaking, constant feedback to make it, possible coexistence of everyone, of different stakeholders and different interests. So I think that, long story short, binding law is not maybe the one to tackle APIs at the moment, but the cooperation and co-regulation and standards developed by the private sector is maybe the way to go.
Yeah, and I would just add here also on the law aspect, when we see a law like PSD2 obliging to open via APIs and the word API is mentioned directly, it actually works. It takes time, but it works at large scale. When we see a regulation like GDPR, when the word API is not mentioned directly, with just the machine-readable document about data portability, because I see Isabella De Michele's question in the thing. When in the law there is not directly the word API, let's say company they try to not have APIs and public APIs and open APIs to transfer data. So at least if there is a law, it will always work better if the word API is expressly mentioned, as we see. This is why, for example, in Australia, they preferred to follow the UK open banking example than GDPR for that reason. So yeah, it's also an important aspect to put that term. That I agree that it's technical.
Public services, public payment services, was API mentioned at all?
Yeah.
Was okay.
It's just to say that
it's been envisioned, it's been foreseen for sharing high value data sets and dynamic data. But for payment services, I'm not quite sure. But I think that industry steps in and may with this solution, and it basically helped to develop the implementation framework, and it worked very well. So on the specific choice of tools, I'm not sure, but it might have been actually initiative of the private sector.
I'll trust you if the word is not mentioned, but it seems it's mentioned at least because it's almost clear. But I will trust you on that. We have time for one last comment. What would be the main idea you want all the attendees of this workshop to be back with? Like maybe David, what would be your one comment or one idea?
Think about how you measure things. That's all. Actually, think about it. Think about it before you. It's like the old woodworking joke of measure twice, cut once. Yeah, I think that applies to IT as well. But we tend to everybody measures lots of things in different ways, and it's chaos out there.
So agree before you sign, and then at some point everything will be fine.
And agree what it is you're actually agree what it is you're signing to, and how you're going to agree with each other that you're meeting in.
Let's agree on how we will agree. Perfect.
Yes. I'll steal that. Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe Daniel? Oh, you're on mute, Daniel. The most pronounced sentence since COVID.
Yeah. Is it fine?
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. So the main idea I want to highlight here is that we need everyone to make the city, to push the city forward, especially in these hard times after the COVID. We have many things to rebuild, to recover, and we need everyone for that. So APIs are an essential part of this recovery in business, because it's the interface where we connect, how we connect companies, entrepreneurs, large businesses, etc., to this task of building the city.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Smart city cannot happen without APIs. Jonas, will be one last comment.
Maybe to add to Daniel, and let's build on that bigger purpose. So creating a better world. We really need to do that, and APIs are literally the API key to that success. But it's a cultural change. So let's use imagination to make Europe better.
The API key to smart cities. I'll steal you
Exactly.
this one. Kasia, for ending this panel. One last idea you want to share?
Well, like one word, cooperation. I think that we should cooperate, talk to each other, and create the way forward. I don't see any other way. So in a way, standards and what David mentioned, and other panelists, it's a way to create a space for cooperation, for understanding. Yeah. Thank you.
And the word cooperation, I really hear it strongly, especially when you demonstrated in your presentation that 30 or 40% of companies can revoke APIs at any time for any reason in their terms of services. That's extremely scary. What's the exact numbers? More than that, even, no?
I can't remember, but it was
it was extremely hard. So cooperation, trust, and let's continue to build more open, transparent, and easier to understand and fair API term of services, and we will have a fair and open and sustainable digital infrastructure. Thank you very much all for this panel. Just for all listeners, live or in replay, the slides will be available, and of course the video will be accessible in replay also. It was great to discuss with you all. It was great to have you all as a speaker, the previous speaker, with the interesting project we had. I really want to thank Monica Posada to trust API Days to be a good partner to reach API practitioners and talk about, in this workshop, the legal framework of the European digital strategy. We will see each other tomorrow morning for opening of the, let's say, not just the workshop, but also the main track of the event. And yes, we'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Central European time zone.